I'm very excited for this conversation. I'm very excited to be in conversation with Claire Shipman. I've actually known her for a little while, and I'm getting to know her much more deeply as she serves on the board of trustees of Columbia University, which I have just recently joined, and she's been so wonderful in welcoming me. And so we have this shared history of our college experience at Columbia. So we're really connecting over that. But Claire is just such an accomplished woman and person, and really grateful that she has agreed to spend some time with us this evening to really talk about something really important, I think, to us as women, and certainly for such a time as this, really to talk about confidence. So I'm going to give you a little bit of Claire's background, and then we're going to just jump into a conversation so we can hear from her, and I'll ask her some questions, and we'll be in conversation for about 20-25 minutes. And then we really want to hear from you. We want you all, this is not a shy group, Claire. Our Women United members and other stakeholders are eager to engage you in a discussion, particularly, where we are today, just in the world, and some of the real skills and tools we need around building confidence as we move forward. So as I mentioned, Claire is a Columbia grad, undergrad, and graduate school in international and public affairs. She, for many years, was an award-winning journalist. When I was looking at her bio, I think she won every award that there was to win, which is amazing. She was at CNN, NBC, ABC, serving as a White House correspondent, a senior international correspondent in Moscow during the fall of the Soviet Union. So many just amazing and incredible experiences. And we could just talk about that, right? The White House, the Soviet, like that could take up a lot of time and energy. She's won the DuPont Award, an Emmy, a Peabody, the National Headliners Award, just really, really incredibly accomplished in the field of journalism. And then decided to be a writer, and to really funnel her creativity and her passion into writing. And she's written 4 New York Times best-selling books on confidence. They are The Confidence Code, The Confidence Code for Girls, Living the Confidence Code, and Womenomics. I think I said that right. I pronounced that right. So really focused on confidence, and particularly as it relates to women and women's, I would say, empowerment, right? As we kind of engage in the world. And so we thought this would be such a timely conversation in this moment where we are trying to enter a post-COVID reality where, we are kind of entering with trepidation. The world has changed, there's economic upheaval. We are so more acutely aware of racial and social inequities. There's so much to be unsure about. So to have a conversation about confidence in this moment is very timely and important for us, who we are as women, as leaders, and also for the work that we collectively aspire to do for our community. So that is what brings us here. So Claire, I want to just jump in, what is confidence? I mean, people talk about it like, I feel confident. Is it a feeling? Is it what is confidence? How would you define it?
I'm so thrilled this is happening. Sheena and I have been talking about this for years. So I'm really glad I'm with all of you. And it's such a delight to be getting to know you, Sheena, and it's really exciting. And I'm a big fan of United Way. And over the years, I've in various locations I've given talks, Caddy's given talks. A friend of mine used to run it down here in Washington. I just love the organization. So thank you for all the work you all do with and in conjunction with United Way. Confidence, it's funny, when we set out to write this book on confidence, we had a gut about it, but figuring out what it was one of the hardest things, really just getting agreement from academics and experts and, the whole array of people who would sort of, you would turn to. At one point we just thought, can we even move ahead? Because it was seemed like so many different things. So the best definition we got, it came from a professor at Ohio State University, Professor Petty, who explained to us that confidence is what turns our thoughts into action. And it's not really even something we would have thought, right? Because I think we thought, oh, confidence is when you just feel great about yourself, or you have that, or you really kind of sense it in someone else often, or you think you do, right? That person seems so confident, or they always do, and so we were getting it, I think, more mixed up with self-esteem in a way, which is when you really just, I think, understand that you have value as a person, right? That's much more self-esteem. And then there's optimism, there's all these confidence cousins, we call it. But the key to understanding confidence is really understanding the action component. Because if you're not doing, you're not actually using confidence or displaying it, right? So you can't just think a lot about being confident, and people can't just sort of tell you things, like as a parent, like I can't just tell my kids stuff that's going to make them confident. It's experiential, right? So this is so it's confidence turns our thoughts into action. It lets us do things in the world. The other amazing thing about it is that we would come to learn over time, and I will talk more about it later, but is that the way we can make more of it is that process of doing and risking, failing usually, and then recovering. And so if you're not taking action, you're actually just not building up your storehouse of confidence. So that's really intertwined. And what really struck us, Sheena, about this definition for women is that, one thing we would observe, and the reason we even came into this work, is like women, we often, especially in the workplace, we often hesitate, right? We doubt ourselves, we wonder, we want to think one more time, we want to be sure all of these things that often mean we're not just doing and trying as frequently as we could be. We may not be failing as frequently, right, as often the men do, but then we're actually not building confidence. And so it really, that definition was key for us.
That's so important. And your work, your books are so focused on science and data, which is so important. So what you've described, it's like confidence is a verb as opposed to like a descriptor, and actually it's a verb. You got it. And there's behavior, and you talked about building it like it's a muscle. And so and you talked a little bit about differences between women and men. So where does the difference come from, and what is the difference in the expression and levels of confidence between women and men?
So this is why we got into this topic for our book, which is that we wrote Womenomics, which was all heavily about, right, and I hope all of you know this data already, right? Just all the great data about diversity in the workplace and women in the workplace and what they bring to the bottom line, right? That the more women you have at any sort of middle to senior level of a company, the better it does, right? It was just about all this incredible economic data that even since we wrote the book has been just redone by dozens of firms. So it's pretty obvious now, but it was a lot about really the economic value of women in the workplace, right? But this we kept bumping up against in our interviews with incredible women, like probably like all of you on the call. We would just anecdotally hear from women who would say, well, like I'm about to get a promotion, but I'm not sure I'm ready. Or my boss wants me to do this, but I don't think I'm qualified. And for me and Caddy, because I guess because we're not always that confident, like, so we would think to ourselves, well, we're not that confident, but these women look super confident, like, especially like we would talk to people in, again, in the world of business or in the world, any of these jobs that seem really hard to us. we think, what are they talking about? Like couldn't even understand it. Or they'd say they feel like an imposter, like the imposter syndrome. And so we thought, we have to check into this. And that's when we realized, looking at the data, that there's a significant amount of data that does show that women on average feel less confident in the workplace, exhibit less confidence than men do. So there really is a confidence gap, and it expresses itself in different ways, right? It's not a competence gap at all, but the confidence gap expresses itself in a variety of ways. For example, there are a bunch of studies that show that women who just graduate from college or business school on average will just ask for less money than men do. There was one study in the UK that showed sort of men and women had to just define what they think they're worth. And women were sort of picking a number that was 20% lower, right, than what men do. So there's there's that aspect. There's some studies that show, and I wonder what you guys might want to even put this in the chat. I'm going to be curious, right? If you're applying, this is one of my favorite studies. And this was a study done in corporate America, right? So it's not even an academic study. But if you're applying for a new, oops, sorry, I'm knocking stuff over on my desk. If I look like I'm terrified, I was for a minute. But if you're applying for a new job or a promotion at work, what percentage of the qualifications do you think most women would imagine they would need to have? Like, what would you guess? And feel free to put it in the chat. I know I'm not doing this formally as a poll, which yeah. Okay, so the people guessing 100 are right. And again, when they did this, 110% wasn't an option, because that would be what I think most women feel they need to have. Men will apply for that same situation when they feel they have 60% of the qualifications, right? So my first reaction whenever I was like, of course, like those crazy men, like, what are they thinking? That's ridiculous. But of course, that's the right move, because they're just assuming they're going to be able to learn it or figure it out, or, there's another measure that I've seen with my own kids, which is so funny, which is just, and one professor who says she works with her graduate students just to teach them how to do studies, right? And she wants to know what the results will be in advance, so she can verify how they've done it. So you ask men and women how they believe they've performed on a quantitative reasoning test of some sort, like a math or science test of some sort that they've just taken. And the women routinely underestimate how they've performed, and the men routinely overestimate how they've performed. I remember hearing this from my son at one point. He's like, Mom, all the girls in school like always complain, and then they do so well. And I always think I've aced everything, and then I really haven't. Like, I get to see. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. But it's interesting too, because Columbia Business School, Sheena, had done studies on the male version of this, on the sort of overconfidence part, and they call honest overconfidence, which I like, which means it's not bravado, right? They're not just being jerks, like, oh, I think I'm so great. Like, they actually have that assessment, right? That's the way they're reading it. And they tend to overestimate their performance or abilities by 30%.
Wow. And so what is it? Is it, nature, nurture? I mean, why is there such huge gap and discrepancy?
Well, both, of course. So we jumped in thinking, all right, now that we saw that first part of the data, it's just irritating. Like, are men just born more confident? What is the deal? And, we were surprised, actually. I think we assumed we would go down this road of looking at the science and the genetics and the biology, because we had to, right? Because we're journalists and we just wanted to report that. But we thought we would find it was mainly nurture. There's a fair amount of nature there. So we found, I know, it's really interesting. So there's a genetic component to confidence, which I didn't expect. So a combination of kind of the people who study this, like geneticists, biologists, psychologists, all estimate that sort of between 30 to 50% of our confidence is inherited. And it can come from, I don't know how many of you are into like genetic stuff and our brain hormones, but what they're seeing now is that there's certain number of hormones that affect confidence, and there are things that affect serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine. In some cases, it's like almost the flip side of the variant that might make somebody anxious, right? If you have the opposite variant, things roll off you more easily, right? You're just so there are these things. Caddy and I, by the way, at this point, we're like genetic, like, and this was right when companies like Genomind or 23andMe were just starting.
Yeah.
Test our genes. Oh my God, this will be so exciting. So we like spit and send it off. And we both are basket cases when it comes to genetic confidence. So that was really not fun to do. But the other part of the science, because of course, by the way, we both felt like we failed a test because we're women. We're like, oh, we did something wrong. Like our genes aren't exactly what we said. I'm like, why do we care? We're like over 50 years old. My God, what is this about? But, the other part of the science that's actually great to understand is that, scientists are really also diving into kind of plasticity of the brain, right? So when we say now, you really can rewire your brain, right? And people talk about cognitive behavioral therapy for everything from like PTSD to like stress relief to, arachnophobia, fear of spiders, right? They see now how that works. Like they can actually, from scans, see your brain changing with this emphasis on thinking in a different way, which is sort of still shocking to me. But if you start to get control of certain thought patterns, you literally, and you do it repetitively, you can kind of rewire your brain. So that left us understanding that, okay, there's a chunk of confidence we're born with, but most likely a bigger chunk, probably about 60%, that we affect. And, we can do a lot about it. I think on the nurture front, what's really interesting, well, let me just say something about the male female thing, because that genetic part is splits pretty evenly among men and women, right? In terms of the who has oxytocin, dopamine. What is different though about male and female brains, and there is a difference, is that the testosterone estrogen part is really different. So testosterone, which men have like 10 times more of than we do, is a huge kind of boost for risk taking. And like, if you remember that, like confidence is what turns our thoughts into action, and that process, like to get that going, you have to be willing to take risk, because you have to be willing to do, and there's some element of risk taking involved. And testosterone, like it can send men off the other way, right? There's really interesting studies that show, like with traders in London, and like if your testosterone levels are too high, you're doing really risky things, right? So that's a different, but estrogen, which women have more of, that's kind of some of that like people skills, high EQ, more time in our sort of rational part of our prefrontal cortex. There's actually a part of our brains that I find really interesting that scientists have dubbed the worrywart center, because it's kind of like the part of our brains that looks out for any challenges or things ahead that are going to be problems. It's physically bigger in the female brain than in the male brain, right? So we got into this whole chapter on this, like our IQs are basically the same, like our functionality is basically the same. But what really struck me and Caddy is that we often have a very different approach to risk. And this plays out, by the way, in like, this is one reason why, all the way back to the beginning, when we were talking about like diversity and the value of diversity, right? So women are often really valuable as managers, not always, but often, because we see the future better. We do tend to operate like with a little more caution, a little more of the long view, a little more ability to listen, not just talking all the time. There's some differences that are really valuable to have. But when it comes to sort of assessing our own performance sometimes, or weighing whether we're ready for something, or especially when I feel like when it gets really about us, we aren't as risk ready, right, as we
Mhm.
could be. And that can actually have an impact. And then,
Right.
sorry, I know this is a super long answer, but just very quickly on the nurture front, because we've written these books on girls, what's really interesting is that there is a component that's nurture, and that is that girls, like from a very early age, are, because we have these slight brain differences, right? We're really good at people pleasing. We have higher EQ. Any of you have daughters, or we've all been girls, right? We're much more likely to like try to get everything right on a spelling test or try to just do what adults want, right? And what happens is the adults love that. Who doesn't love that behavior? Like it's so much easier to deal with. And so all the way from age 0 to 21, right? All the way through school, basically, that is encouraged. But then you get into the real world, and the real world demands sort of that you take risks and try different things. And nobody's giving you like a pat on the head all the time or saying you got 100 on something, right? Or telling you exactly how to do it. And boys, on the other hand, don't do all that stuff, and they kind of screw up all the time, but they learn that it's okay. So
Right.
basically, the first 20 years of our lives, we're avoiding failure and risk, right? Trying hard. We become perfectionists often, many of us. And all of that behavior is antithetical to building more confidence, right? We build more confidence when we try things, fail, do it again.
Wow, that was so rich, and so what you said, and people are like hungry and ready to like. There's a million questions in the chat. I know people's wheels are turning. And so I want to, before we get into the questions that I know a lot of people are very eager to ask, is to talk a little bit about, okay, so is it then, if it's nature, if it's part of it is nature, we've got some nurture components, how important is it to cultivate confidence, and what do we need to do about it? Before you answer that, as you were talking, I have 3 sons, and I always wondered, I said, they're different, because they would come to me like, I was like, what did you think was going to happen when you jumped off the bunk bed head first? What did you think? And I look at the little girls, and they're like, actually think things through to their logical end. Like, if I do that, then that might happen. So there's definitely, I can see the benefit and also the challenge. So I mean, some people just say, well, that's just not my personality. Maybe it's okay. Maybe is it important to cultivate? And if so, like, what are some of the things that we need to be doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And we asked that too at the beginning of the book, right? Like, is it something we need, right? How important is it? And there's a really interesting guy out at Berkeley, a professor who studied essentially competence versus confidence and was trying to weigh the value of each, because women are really focused on competence, right? Like, we just want to get it done well. What he found, and we don't have enough time, but I won't go into how he did it, the studies, but it's really interesting. His name's Cameron Anderson, if you geek out on this and want to learn more. But he did these studies with his graduate students, and he effectively found that the more confident students ended up having their ideas listened to more, effectively just becoming leaders, right, in their groups more regularly, whether or not they were as competent. So, but the silver lining is, what he found is you can't have a huge gap between competence and confidence, right? Because that will just get uncovered fairly quickly, and it doesn't work. But that also, what Caddy and I took away from that after we were like, that's annoying, but is that confidence is like, it's like any other workplace skill in a way, or life skill. It's useful. Like and I also want to say, like, it's useful. It's not about women need to change and men don't, right? Like I said, there's a whole book to be written on the consequences of overconfidence. And by the way, we can see it everywhere we look, right? I don't even know that we need to write a book about it, but confidence, just as one of my favorite quotes about why it's important comes from a Buddhist scholar, Sharon Salzberg. I don't know if any of you know her, but she's amazing. And she said, I think of confidence as a kind of energy and an ability to move toward things without holding back. And there is something like amazing about that. personally, I don't experience it very often. Like I'm just trying and trying, and I take more risk now, but I think it's useful because people can sense it. So it's useful at work, but I think it's even more valuable for our person, for our lives as humans, really.
Right. And so how, I mean, in your research and studies and conversations, how do you cultivate that energy? How do you build that muscle? I think we're all at this place where at the end of this kind of COVID journey, and we've done a lot of self-reflection, and the world has changed, and we want to show up differently, and kind of really lean into what we feel like we're supposed to be doing. So how do we build that skill?
Well, in short, I will just say it involves for all of us, and it's different, is understanding when you're in your comfort zone and what is risky to you. And that's literally different for everyone, right? For some people, it's speaking up. For other people, it's just making decisions, right? For other people, it's advocating for themselves. So you have to kind of understand where do you need to get out of your comfort zone? But the key is making sure that you're taking risks regularly. It's like acclimating yourself to a diet that involves things that seem risky. For me, like as dumb as it sounds, sometimes when I was a journalist, it was like just turning in reports, like saying done that I thought were like just okay. Because I knew like I was going to drive my whole team crazy. I wouldn't be able to do anything else the next day because I'd have stayed up all night, or so sometimes now I don't love confrontation. Sometimes it's just pressing send on an email and not thinking about it for the 150th time, right? Because that's also like, I didn't even talk about this, but rumination, perfectionism, overthinking, rumination, all of that, those things are sort of enemies of confidence, right? Because the more we think, the less we're doing, right? So I think it's personally just identifying how can I start slowly. I'm not saying like, jump off a cliff, but to just do things that seem risky to me. And I will say right now, like it's also important to recognize that it's been a harder year in most cases for women than it has been for men, right? We have to own that. Like there's just no question that we are doing so much more to like fill in everybody's emotional cracks and like help and just all of it, right? If people lean on us, we allow ourselves to be, in every way, economically. Like you guys have probably seen this data. So I think having some self-compassion is like step one in recognizing that, okay, that's true. But I also think there's an opportunity now too, and I've been thinking a lot about this personally, that like the world is being remade right now, right? So understanding that the barrier to entry for taking risks is really different, right? So kind of continuing to take advantage of this, like who's watching, who's measuring, who is really caring about things having to be done a certain way, or the way something has to sound, or the way something, right? It's actually a great moment to challenge yourself and take risks, which I know it might not, if you're feeling kind of battered after the year of COVID, that seems counterintuitive, but it can also be energizing. So I'm saying, as somebody who keeps pushing yourself out of a comfort zone, it's hard, but it can be energizing. So I think that's the ticket. It's like, some people say to us, like there's a top lawyer we interviewed and I still talk to her, and she talks about how just making decisions every day was the hardest thing, and where she had to build her confidence muscle because she would stall and stall and stall because she thought every decision had to be perfect. And she created a rule for herself, like a mental rule where she's like, 10% of the decisions I make every day will be wrong. And that's okay, because 90% will be right. And I'm just going to live with the fallout. I'm just going to keep moving, right? And doing. And I think so for everybody to identify what that is for themselves and sort of take some risk.
Oh,
Oh, Sheena's internet, she did mention to me it's been a little bit unstable. This is the
The
leaving
storm.
this is this is how it goes. Claire, that absolutely makes so much sense. And I love what people have been putting in the chat a little bit about just like also feeling some camaraderie in the struggles around sometimes what we don't say we're expressing, like the overthinking and the rumination and, the don't let the perfect be the enemy of good. And so many things that I think we often don't say to each other that are equated to that level of confidence that we can also help boost in each other as far as, our peer networks go and things like that. Sheena, I know you're back. Just
Don't you love technology? No, I'm sure Megan picked up the ball there. But I think we want to open it up certainly for questions. But just one last thing, Claire, sometimes we hear when women are taking risks and kind of being very direct that, there's blowback, right? She's acting like a fill in the blank. How do, and I think that's also something that might get in our way or get in people's way, so that what culture and society expects of women in terms of decisiveness and confidence. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then we'll definitely open it up for questions.
It's really tricky, right? Because we are still, as women, expected to be our behaviors in a narrower box, right? And even like Sheena and I were doing this incredible workshop recently on race, and like for Black women, for example, like it's a narrower box, right? Like everybody, like there's just so many kinds of like, I don't know, societal restrictions and expectations placed. And I think that, and this is what I tell young women especially, is you can't really be afraid to make some waves, right? The only way we broaden that box is by example, right? We can't go and convince someone behind closed doors like, but this isn't right and it needs to be right. We have to just be our authentic selves. And one thing that we say a lot to women when we talk about like confidence at work, and people ask about this, it's either like I'll be seen as a B word. I don't even know if I want to say that here, or I'm actually quiet and you don't want to talk first. And I like to analyze, and people won't think I'm confident enough, or I'm not corporate, whatever it is. Sometimes it can help to overtly define your style for people, right? And say, people, I'm a talker and I'm going to say a lot. And this is how I like to lead, operate, run a meeting, whatever it is. And just let me know how that feels, but you're sort of owning it. Or I find I have a lot of women who I don't want to sort of be the first one speaking or the first one and prefer to analyze. I say, own that too and explain. I find I'm more effective in a meeting when I listen and then I wrap things up. Like that's what I'm really good at. That's how I lead. And you can talk about it openly. And I do think the workplace is a little more forgiving and actually open to having those kinds of conversations than even 5 years ago. And especially if we're talking about men, like they kind of want to learn. They're never going to take the first step, but they're eager to not mess it up.
Right. And I think the environment is also, they have to learn as well, right?
They need like guides. Yes.
Yes,
They do.
absolutely. It's a different world in a good way. So yeah, let's open it up. And so since I got booted off and had to come back on a couple of times, I'm glad you didn't really notice, but I don't see the questions in the chat. So someone want to just kind of lift those up, and certainly how do we want to do it, Meg, in terms of, do people raise their hands or they just ask a question? How should we do it?
Sure. I suggest we make it a dialogue. So if you have a question, feel free to hop off mute. Alyssa, it looks like you had put in the first one. Would you like to share that with Claire to kick us off?
So, yeah, well, Claire, you actually did answer it. I don't know if you saw it. It was just about how, because I've always noticed, in my experience, that females tend to have mental illnesses that are, more than the area of depression and bipolar, that tends to be more often females that you hear about it, or perhaps they're more aware of it to come forward with it. So that could actually be a thing that, perhaps males are more worried about that. So that could actually be due to nurture. But I was asking when I did type the question about the hormones that we genetically inherit. You mentioned that they're even the ones that could actually cause those areas of mental illness.
Yeah, I think it's true. I think I remember seeing, because we weren't looking, it's so related because these are the hormones that, again, affect things like anxiety and depression as well. And I do remember seeing, but this is so vague, it's not that helpful, but there is some data on serotonin and the fact that women we can have the same variants of the hormones that produce serotonin, but women's brains and bodies handle that differently. So it's almost like there's scientists on here, you can make fun of me later, but it's almost like there's a detour, or it's not as effective in female brains as a protector in some cases. And it's definitely true because I've read it really frequently that women suffer more from anxiety and depression. And I think there is a link between, it's really interesting because some of the studies we saw show that they can see now that women's brains, when they use these, I think they're MRIs, they can see that neurons in female brains are firing more frequently, right? So it's almost like women's brains are just more active on average. I was like, oh, see, I knew that. But then of course, what they realize is part of that might also be reflecting that ruminating, overthinking, right? Where we're just like, and that not only hurts confidence, but way too much overthinking affects anxiety and depression too. So it's all tied together. But again, there are upsides to all that too, right? Like there are high EQ. I mean, here, one more example, sorry, then we'll go back to questions, and I wanted to say this for all the work you guys are engaged in, like women are more prone to sort of really want to be working in areas where they find meaning, right? And so that is a way, this is a great confidence hack for us that we write about, because we're much more driven by this, we call it me to we thinking, which is like, women are, and there's a great study on this also out of Ohio State, women are much more willing to take a risk on behalf of other people or another organization or their bosses or their colleagues than on behalf of themselves, right? A teenage girl will stand up and talk about her dogs much more quickly than she will stand up to answer a math problem. So like, it's a way, if you're trying to jumpstart a daughter or even yourself, it's kind of a way to take away some of that risky feeling. Like you can almost tell yourself, I'm about to give a big speech, but remind yourself, it's not about me. I'm doing this for my colleagues or for this organization. And it kind of helps get you over that hurdle. It's really motivating.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Other questions?
I have a question. It's Robin from CIBC. Thank you so much for your time tonight, Claire.
Yeah.
So I also am risk adverse, but trying to put myself out there, and I find it easier to kind of speak on behalf of my team. But when it put into situations where I'm trying to advocate for myself, I've been told by a male manager, oh no, that's too big a role. If you do poorly, then it looks badly on me. So just keep on navigating all of your good efforts through somebody else. So even when I put myself in a risky position and I'm told that, then how do I counteract that personal situation? Do I just keep on trying? Do I go to a different advocate, a different person, or how do we overcome that challenge?
I'm sorry, that's so frustrating. You know, and I do know that there are times when, like, I don't know your particular circumstances, but sometimes we hear from women at work or even male managers or people, like, they sometimes, if they're trying to promote women, or people are very focused on, right, how women are doing, there is this sense of, we don't want any women to fail, right? Because
Right,
that's too big a risk for all of us. We can't have,
right.
and that is like, that is unfortunate, right? There needs to be it needs to sort of, some amount of failing and trying and moving on needs to be built into any system. So that's probably not a, and then everything I'm talking about, of course, doesn't really account for, like, a boss who's not great or a manager, right? I mean, and that's, sometimes there's not a lot you can do. I would say that in my own experience, when I at one point had to really just demand something I wanted, but that was really hard for me to do.
Yes,
I just went in with an enormous amount of sort of fact-based arguments and data.
yeah,
It's like, I've done this, and then I did this, and do you remember this? Like, it was literally a stack of printouts. And I just kind of plopped it down and said, I really want to do this. And that kind of, I don't know if it was just that it was a stack of data and he was a man who happened to like that. But sometimes I think making that kind of case can help.
so
And
it's less emotional, it just becomes fact-based.
yeah, exactly. I do. I mean, this whole talk is so laden with stereotypes, so I'm sorry, but it is, like, they sort of apply to a certain extent, as long as we really
Mhm.
don't always apply. But there are cases where your ideal scenario would be, you go to a boss and that person is like, great. Because too often women aren't even going and saying, I want to try it, right?
Right,
It's almost like you're going to have to carry the load for both of you. But I think it's
great,
going back.
thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Claire, it's Lori Kleiman from Sidley, Austin. I wonder if you remember being our featured speaker at one of our Women Partners retreats.
Yes.
It was back in 2013, and we had invited you based on Womenomics. But you told us about the confidence code. And I just want to thank you for continuing to talk about this in a way that isn't a, let's fix the women type of narrative, that in a way that has so many, when I read that book, there were so many aspects of it that I thought were spot on. I thought you were talking to me. And I will tell you that this isn't really a question. It's just more of a gratitude. Big law firm where our summer associates are here. An hour ago, I just spoke to one of our summer associates who was looking for, some advice on what to do to prepare herself and qualify to be a lawyer. And she was talking about, this is a woman who has grown up in this era where all these issues, we talk about them all the time, and still she's saying to me, gee, I'm not sure I'm smart enough. I don't know if I look at just what you were just talking about. I look at other people and they seem, in my law school class, and they seem so much more talented and qualified and intelligent than I am. We just have to keep talking about this, because I think, and I told her, listen, I feel like I'm the president of the Imposter Syndrome Society, and I'm head of a group, and I've been head of the Women's Initiative, and I've been practicing. I'm a partner. I just think these are issues that we just have to keep talking about, and we have to talk to both our male and female colleagues about it, because it's not intuitive, and it's so important, for women to be able to be confident and successful, and understand that it's not them. It's, there's nothing wrong with them. It's just something that affects all of us.
Yeah, that's so well put. Thank you. And I'm glad you were there to talk to her. I feel the same way. Like, I still feel like when I do one of these talks and I listen to somebody introduce me and they start to like list my accomplishments, I'm always literally, I want to like bury my head and say, oh my gosh, please, you're making way too much of this. It was all luck. And then we were interviewing somebody for the book and we realized like, if all women tend to do that. Like, it's just stunning to me. There's a woman we wrote about in our book who did it, a young woman who graduated from Annapolis, who was picked for the explosive ordnance division, like one of 2 women. And we're just, Mikey, that's great. Oh, I don't even know why they chose me. I was just lucky. I'm like, what? You went to Annapolis? Like, let's snap out of it. What are you talking about? But what the other thing it's important for everybody to realize is when we do that, we're just not teaching younger women what the path is. So if I say, oh, I was just lucky, how does that help anybody? Like, that just means like, I hope you get lucky too, right? And so I feel like it's, a combination of saying, I feel that way sometime too, but by the way, here's how to do it. Just encouraging women to just try it or do it. I mean, the other thing we talk about a lot in our kids' books, and I have found it so helpful, is this idea of do it afraid, which is that if we wait for the fear to be gone, we will never do anything. The fear, and I think we all make this mistake, like that if we have fear, it means I shouldn't be acting or doing something. And I think men, we realize, have a different interpretation of it. They'll say, we don't feel confident either, or I feel afraid, but they use that to spur them on. And I think just understanding that fear is natural and we have to get used to being somewhat uncomfortable, that then we will do things.
And I think, what you've both just kind of mentioned, how we can see other women, right? So I read your bio, Claire, and I'm like, she's a rock star, right? Unbelievable. And, what we need to do in community, how we need to encourage each other and support each other and kind of recognize and shine the light and lift up, and help build this muscle of confidence. And so Women United is a group of women that really are focused on coming together to support one another's growth and development, and certainly be in service to community. And I think one of the things that's so important to me, particularly to being the first woman CEO at United Way of New York City, is that our Women United group is strong so that we can be impactful and really make the changes that our community and society so desperately need made. And that I think we are uniquely, because of that EQ and really problem solving skills that we do have in abundance, like how do we really catalyze that and strengthen that? So Women United is a really important group. And I think we will all actually get a copy of one of Claire's wonderful books. And we really should kind of develop some ways to practice and develop these really, really critical skills. So I think we have time for one more question, but Claire, do you want to respond to that?
I was just going to say, it's so great. I love this idea of kind of community confidence. And for women, one of the things that I think I'm repeating myself a little bit, but it's so essential to know because a lot of people say, how can I help my colleagues? How can I help my friends? And partly it's what we do best, which is just listening, right? And reassuring, right? We're just the best at that. Or you're great, you're fine, everything's great, But the thing that is so valuable is nudging people, like giving them one nudge. Like I just told Robin, right? Just go back. And in the data on hearing from one person you respect and what that does, one person who says, you could do that, you should try this, you should stop worrying about that and go do that tomorrow, right? Instead of engaging in the ruminating with a friend or colleague, just be that person who gives the little push. And it really matters.
That sounds very powerful. Our last question.
Claire, thank you so much. This was such a wonderful, informative talk. My name is Elisa Castillo, and I am the Executive Director of the Central American Refugee Center. And we're actually joined tonight by my Chief Operations Officer, two 30-something women who took over an organization last year, mid-COVID, from two men who had run the organization for 40 years. So if you want to talk about the difference between competence and confidence, it's right there. And we've certainly seen how that plays out in an organization, but I think it's amazing that even in spite of that reality, and we can recognize it, the lack of confidence sometimes definitely comes up with both of us. So if you could be the voice in the back of our heads in the moment that the lack of confidence is creeping in, what would you say? What is that one liner, that pearl of wisdom that we should always keep in mind? No pressure. I know it's an easy one.
Mine is so kind of not something I'd want to say in public, but sometimes I just, I'll tell myself to do it afraid, but sometimes I have to tell myself when I'm just approaching somebody, or I'm doing something that I think is just hard and risky, that feels that way to me. I have to remind myself, who cares, right? Like I have a little, like, and that sounds like what my 16-year-old daughter says to me routinely. And so it's really sounds rude, but it helps just, I think, having a kind of little mantra or bit of something like that you tell yourself, which is just gets you over the hump of hesitation. And just reminding yourself, here's the other bit of wisdom that should always be in your heads. Okay. So we got into really obsessively understanding the science, and this one scientist at Cold Spring Harbor Labs who studies confidence in rats, right? Which I love, because there are confident rats and not confident rats. I never know. We got obsessed with the idea of sort of what's the right amount, like what's the perfect amount of confidence? Of course, that's what we were obsessed with, like as women, like what's the perfect amount of confidence? We need that. So if you kind of think like women are always, if there's a scale, it's like women are always tilting a little bit this way, right? And men are tilting a little bit that way. And to actually take action, you need a little bit like this, right? Because if you're a little bit overconfident, if you just think about life in general, right? If you think too much about it and ruminate too much, like you might just stay in bed, right? You need to have that little bit of like overconfidence, and that's going to help you do things. And so I think I always tell women, whenever there is a situation, I feel certain about this, where you are wondering whether you're ready, are you good enough for this job? Should you be reaching out? Like something that it just involves you personally, you're always underestimating yourself. Like, just please take that as a rule of thumb. Always, we are always like this. And so like scooting yourself up to what seems super risky to you, you're probably not even hitting this, right? So just know that, like, of course I'm ready. Of course I should be asking for this. Of course I should be sending this email, putting my hand up, whatever it is, right? Try to remember that, like, just like you got to get that needle up.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Claire. I hope, Claire, you appreciate what a gift you have given in your scholarship, in your research, and your writing, and just how you show up. And we are really grateful that you've written these amazing books, that you've done all this work, and that you spent the time with our Women United community tonight. I mean, I can feel even through the Zoom and the chats and the text messages that, people are really moved and have just an appreciation, like saying it out loud, like, hey, there's a gap, like this is what we think in our heads, but to hear it out loud, to say it's okay. And these are some things that we can do and can do in community. Really, it's empowering, and we're grateful for you. Absolutely.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here. It seems like a great community. I'm really honored I got to talk to you all, and I know that I'm sure coming out of this pandemic is going to be challenging for everyone, and especially with a lot of the work everybody's engaged in. But I'm grateful to all of you. So thank you, and thanks for listening.
Absolutely. And we are going to do it afraid. And we're going to say to ourselves, who cares or who gives a if we're gonna use all those tools and go forward and Women United, thank you for this evening. I know there'll be lots of others that will engage with this wonderful video. Now we have it kind of captured in time. And we'll continue to have discussions around it and what we need to do to build our confidence. We need to have a little book club so we can read the book and kind of share notes. And I hope you can see, Claire, all of the love in the chat and appreciation.
And our next book, I'm working on a new book, but I've been really procrastinating. Oh my God. So I am terrified now. I have to get off my, you know what, and get working, but it's on women and power. So that's our next topic. So maybe I can come back to you guys.
We're ready for that one. We're ready for that one. We have a big event every year called The Power of Women to Make a Difference. So we definitely want to hear about that. But thanks again. Thank you, Women United. Thank you, Meg and Michelle and team. This has been a fantastic evening and we appreciate you and look forward to seeing you at our next event. Meg, did you want to close us out?
Sure. Thank you, Sheena. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Claire. Really appreciate the great participation tonight. I would love to keep you all involved, Women United, via our volunteerism, leadership support. I posted the Women United LinkedIn showcase page in the chat. Would love for you to follow us to really keep up with all of our happenings. So thank you for ending your day with us.
Thanks.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
you.